The scent of rain-soaked asphalt and damp earth clings to the night air, a chill that always seems to sharpen my senses, even after all these years. Crickets saw their relentless symphony from the dense shadows of the overgrown hedge bordering my property. It's a sound that brings me a peculiar kind of peace, a steady rhythm against the chaotic memory of certain events. You see, true justice, the kind that truly cleanses, is rarely found in the swift, dramatic pronouncements of a courtroom. More often, it is a painstakingly slow craft, an artifact polished over years, even decades, wielded with a precision that goes beyond simple retribution. It is the art of the long game, a symphony of quiet calculation against overt, arrogant aggression. And for me, it remains a project of profound satisfaction. Some time ago, I was approached by Marcus Thorne, a man I had known and respected for years, a former CEO from a previous company where we had shared the trenches of corporate warfare. He was a visionary, a man with an almost infectious optimism, but sometimes a blind spot for the grittier realities of human nature. He had recently launched a new venture, a software company, and it was, to put it mildly, floundering. For 2 long years, the company had struggled to make a single sale. The first year had been a necessary period of gestation, the software product still in beta, a nascent digital entity not yet ready for the harsh light of the market. The second year, however, had exposed a fundamental flaw in their operational strategy, a catastrophic misjudgment of human psychology and sales dynamics. They had, with an almost childlike naivete, attempted to leverage their tech staff to make high-end sales calls to C-level executives. Now, anyone with a modicum of experience in the corporate world will tell you, these are 2 vastly different species. The technologist speaks a language of algorithms, data structures, and intricate functionalities. The executive, on the other hand, speaks in terms of return on investment, market advantage, and how a product will seamlessly integrate to solve their specific, often abstract, business needs. The 2 rarely intersect naturally. It was a communication chasm, a linguistic void that paralyzed their sales efforts. But I had always possessed a unique aptitude for bridging that gap, for translating the complex jargon of engineering into the compelling narrative of tangible benefits. I could make the esoteric accessible, make the abstract concrete. Marcus, knowing this, had headhunted me, offering a lifeline to his struggling enterprise. The opportunity was tempting, but not without its significant drawbacks. The company's new offices were located an hour-and-a-half drive, one way from my home. 3 hours on the road every single day, a substantial chunk of precious time swallowed by the endless ribbon of highway. Marcus, ever accommodating, understood this impediment. He offered a flexible arrangement. I could work remotely, from the quiet sanctuary of my home office, provided I maintained rigorous updates on the sales management tool, that essential digital ledger where the status and notes of every prospect were meticulously logged, attended all critical in-person meetings, and ensured the executive team received their daily, comprehensive sales reports. It was a fair proposal, and I accepted. However, despite the remote work agreement, I knew the first month would demand a different approach. A new company, a new product, a new team, it required immersion. I needed to breathe the same air as the developers, to absorb the intricacies of the software, to understand its soul. I needed to sit with the product managers, to glean their vision, and to forge a 2-way confidence with every department head. So, for those initial 4 weeks, I endured the daily 3-hour commute. Each morning, as the first tendrils of dawn stretched across the sky, I was already behind the wheel, my mind already dissecting potential strategies, mapping out the labyrinthine path to market penetration. Each evening, I returned home, physically drained but mentally invigorated, a deeper understanding of the company's ecosystem slowly solidifying within me. By the end of that intense month, I had a comprehensive grasp of the product, a nuanced understanding of the target market, and a meticulously crafted sales strategy poised for execution. I was ready to launch. It was during this critical preparatory phase, just 4 days before I was set to hit the ground running and engage potential buyers, that the company brought in a new vice president of sales. Her name was Eleanor Vance. Her background, I quickly learned, was steeped in the banking industry, a long and ostensibly successful career in sales and marketing for financial products. From the moment she arrived, a peculiar disquiet settled within me. There was an air about her, a brittle confidence that felt less like genuine capability and more like a carefully constructed facade. My initial impression, unfortunately, proved accurate. She knew, to put it plainly, absolutely nothing about the complex intricacies of enterprise-level software. Her understanding of the tech space was rudimentary at best, a superficial gloss that quickly fractured under any probing inquiry. I spent an inordinate amount of time attempting to orient her, to bridge her vast knowledge gap, explaining the fundamental principles of the product, outlining the sales cycle, deciphering the technical specifications. It was a colossal diversion, an unwelcome drain on my already stretched resources. I needed to focus on strategy, on outreach, on converting leads. Instead, I found myself acting as an impromptu tutor, a reluctant interpreter of the obvious. It soon became clear why she had been brought on board. Not for her sales acumen in the tech sector, but for her perceived strength in attracting financial investors, a critical need for a struggling startup. She was a different kind of asset, one whose value, I suspected, would prove to be more about external appearances than internal substance. Nevertheless, I pressed forward. My focus remained unwavering. My strategy was clear, my targets identified. I packed my bags, leaving behind the burgeoning internal politics and Eleanor's unsettling presence, and traveled to a key target state, a fertile ground identified for initial market penetration. For 19 relentless days, I crisscrossed that state, from bustling urban centers to quiet industrial parks, engaging with prospects, demonstrating the software, navigating objections, and ultimately, closing deals. It was a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and negotiations. I lived on adrenaline and lukewarm coffee, driven by the belief in the product and the unspoken trust from Marcus. When I finally returned, physically exhausted but utterly triumphant, I brought with me 17 signed contracts from a diverse array of buyers, totaling a staggering $2 million in sales. It was, for a company that had previously achieved zero revenue, a seismic event. Marcus Thorne was, as anticipated, overjoyed. His relief was palpable, his gratitude effusive. The investment in me had paid off, dramatically validating his decision. 6 months rapidly passed, and I continued to operate from my home office, a hub of productivity. The sales numbers continued their upward trajectory. I was, as the saying goes, rocking and rolling. The CEO remained happy. The company's future, once so uncertain, now seemed brighter. Good things, indeed, were happening. During this period of sustained growth, Eleanor Vance, the VP of Sales, had apparently been working her own angle, leveraging her finance connections. She had successfully landed a potential investor, a substantial one, willing to inject a formidable $6 million into the company. The investor group was now slated to come into town for a critical discovery meeting, a deep dive into the company's operations, its products, and its sales performance. Eleanor called me, instructing me to drive up to the office for this pivotal meeting. The investors, she emphasized, specifically wanted to meet the salesperson, the individual who had single-handedly broken the company's sales drought and driven its recent success. I understood the importance of my presence, the need to demonstrate the human engine behind the impressive numbers. I made the long drive, anticipating a straightforward, positive interaction. However, as I stood just seconds before walking into the conference room, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the low murmur of voices filtering through the closed door, Eleanor Vance pulled me aside. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, an edge of urgency in her tone. She needed my help, she said, to back her up on a lie she had told them. My blood ran cold. The words hung in the air, dense and suffocating. She explained, essentially doubled my actual sales numbers on the prospectus presented to the investors. She needed me to corroborate this fabrication. My immediate, visceral reaction was a hard, unyielding refusal. There was absolutely no way I was going to engage in such a blatant deception, especially not with high-stakes investors. It went against every fiber of my professional integrity. But Eleanor, sensing my resistance, countered quickly, asserting that Marcus, the CEO, had explicitly okayed the lie, a desperate measure, she implied, to secure the much-needed funding. The revelation was a disquieting jolt. Marcus, my friend, my former colleague, complicit in this deceit? It cast a sudden, troubling shadow over our long-standing relationship. With barely a moment to process this unsettling information, we were ushered into the meeting. The air in the conference room was thick with anticipation. The investor, a sharp-eyed man named Mr. Sterling, was meticulously poring over the financial prospectus. He reached a page detailing sales figures, his finger tracing the inflated numbers Eleanor had so recklessly presented. Then, he looked up, his gaze direct and piercing, fixing on me. "So," he began, his voice even, "how many sales are you making a month, typically?" Behind Mr. Sterling, Eleanor Vance began to gesticulate wildly, a frantic, almost desperate semaphore. Her eyes widened, her mouth silently forming words I couldn't quite decipher, but her meaning was clear: lie. My conscience, however, was having none of it. My focus remained on Mr. Sterling, my voice steady and unwavering. "My average monthly sales," I stated, my tone even and factual, "have been consistently strong since launch, averaging just under $200,000. A heavy silence descended upon the room. Mr. Sterling's eyes flickered from me to the document in his hand, where Eleanor's fabricated number, nearly double my truthful figure, was starkly displayed. A puzzled, almost suspicious look crossed his face. Behind him, Eleanor was now giving me the kind of icy, venomous stink eye that could curdle milk. No one spoke. The silence stretched, fraught with unspoken accusations and the palpable tension of a lie exposed. It was in that agonizing moment, as Mr. Sterling's gaze darted between me and the contradictory document, that I instinctively understood the precariousness of the situation. The entire investment, the future of the company, hung by a thread. "May I see that document for a moment, Mr. Sterling?" I asked, my voice betraying none of the internal scramble for a solution. As he handed it over, my mind raced, analyzing the printed figures. And then, fate, or perhaps simply a moment of quick-witted observation, aligned. The inflated number Eleanor had cited was, for example, something like 3.5 million, when my real number was 2.5 million over a period. My eyes immediately honed in on the specific monthly figure that had caused the discrepancy. I saw it, a glimmer of an escape route. "Ah," I said, a carefully modulated note of professional concern in my voice. "I see the confusion. It appears there's been a simple transposition error here. If you look closely, the first two digits of the monthly average appear to have been flipped. My actual average aligns with what I stated, but I can see how, at a quick glance, one might transpose the first two figures, especially when reviewing numerous documents." I gestured vaguely at the document. It's a common oversight when dealing with large datasets. The explanation, delivered with calm authority, allowed Mr. Sterling to save face. He peered at the document again, a flicker of comprehension replacing the suspicion. The numbers, with a slight mental adjustment, indeed correlated well enough to my truthful statement, especially if one imagined the first two digits had been inverted. The tension in the room, though still present, subtly eased. He nodded slowly, seemingly satisfied. "I see," he murmured. The crisis, for the moment, was averted. We moved on, the fragile thread of the investment miraculously intact. But Eleanor's glare, a promise of future retribution, burned into my consciousness. The next week, I found myself engaged in a routine meeting with Victor Hayes, the company's chief information officer, in the relative quiet of his office. Victor was a decent enough fellow, generally professional, and our conversation that day was light, touching on technical specifications for the product. And then, without warning, the entire atmosphere shifted. Mid-sentence, he leaned back in his chair, a casual, almost dismissive flick of his wrist. "You know," he remarked, a smirk playing on his lips, "you've got big tits." The words hit me like a physical blow, stunning me into immediate silence. It was so utterly unexpected, so crass and unprofessional, especially from a senior executive, that my mind struggled to process it. I was no shrinking violet, no stranger to the sometimes crude banter of the corporate world, but this was different. This was a direct, personal, and profoundly inappropriate comment, delivered with an arrogance that suggested he believed himself untouchable. The shock of it lingered, a bitter aftertaste in my mouth long after I had concluded the meeting and extricated myself from his office. That evening, still replaying the bizarre encounter, I recounted the incident to my best friend, David. David, as it happened, was a lawyer, a sharp, astute criminal defense attorney. It was a casual conversation, a cathartic venting session, but his legal mind immediately clicked into gear. "You should absolutely tell Marcus, the CEO," he advised, his tone serious. "Any good CEO would want to know about something like that, to address it before it escalates." Thinking along sound business practices and adhering to proper corporate protocol, I decided to inform Eleanor Vance first, as she was my direct report. This also presented a slight complication, as my role was a somewhat muddy mix of sales and tech, meaning I also reported directly to Victor Hayes, the CIO, as my other boss. The dual reporting structure had always been a minor administrative headache, but now it felt like a trap. The very next day, Marcus Thorne called me. I recounted the incident with Victor, downplaying its severity. "It's really no big deal, Marcus," I insisted, "but I thought you should know, just so you can have a word with Victor and ensure it doesn't happen again." A quiet word, a reminder of professional conduct. He assured me he would address it immediately. 2 days later, I checked in with Marcus again. To my surprise, he still hadn't spoken to Victor. "The investors are still in town," he explained, an edge of distraction in his voice. "It's been quite hectic." I gently pushed him, emphasizing the importance of nipping such behavior in the bud. And then, almost as an afterthought, a casual mention slipped from my lips. "My best friend," I said, "who happens to be a lawyer, was actually the one who urged me to tell you. He said any good CEO would want to know about it, for the company's sake, to prevent future issues." I reiterated again that I wasn't angry or upset, just concerned about maintaining a professional environment. But Marcus, it seemed, only heard one word: "Lawyer." His reaction was instantaneous and explosive. He went, to put it mildly, apes hit. The calm, composed CEO I had known for years vanished, replaced by a furious, agitated stranger. He launched into a tirade, accusing me of bringing legal action against the company, of stirring up trouble at the most inconvenient time, with the investors still present. "How could you bring a lawyer into this mix?" he bellowed, his voice vibrating with betrayal. This was a man who had been my good friend, a colleague with whom I had shared years of working relationships across 2 different companies. The sudden ferocity of his anger was a cold shock. I tried to calm him, to explain the misunderstanding. "Marcus, I haven't brought a lawyer into anything," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor of shock. "I was just innocently chatting with David, my best friend, who simply happens to be a criminal defense attorney. It was a casual conversation, nothing more. I only wanted you to talk to Victor to prevent it from happening again." He seemed, or so I thought, to slowly calm down. The storm of his anger appeared to recede, leaving behind an uneasy quiet. We hung up, the conversation ending on a note of fragile truce. The next day, I was working from home, diligently plugging away, when my phone rang. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, a brisk, professional female tone. "Hello," she began. "This is Ms. Albright, an attorney. I've been retained by your company regarding your sexual harassment claim." I was utterly flummoxed. The words hung in the air, surreal and absurd. "My sexual harassment claim?" I echoed, genuinely confused. "That's not correct. I have no claim against the company." I adamantly denied it, trying to explain the misunderstanding, the casual nature of my conversation with David, my lawyer friend. But Ms. Albright was resolute. "My instructions indicate otherwise," she stated, her voice unwavering. "We need to schedule a formal interview to discuss the specifics of your claim." And that, in an instant, was when everything changed. Dramatically, the fragile truce with Marcus Thorne shattered into a million pieces. His initial fury, it turned out, had not dissipated. It had merely transmuted into a cold, corporate wrath. He was furious with me, genuinely incandescent with rage, for bringing this upon them at such a critical juncture, with investors scrutinizing every aspect of the company. His reaction, fueled by fear and a perceived betrayal, set a toxic tone that rapidly filtered down through the entire organization. The company began to retaliate against me, systematically and maliciously. Eleanor Vance, the VP of Sales, now seemed to embrace her new mission with a chilling zeal, to make my life an unmitigated hell. Her tactics were insidious, designed to isolate, obstruct, and ultimately break me. She would forget to inform me about crucial meetings I was required to attend, leaving me out of vital discussions and then later admonishing me for my absence. When I was in the office, she would actively freeze me out, orchestrating situations where I was ignored, excluded from conversations, and made to feel like a pariah. The communication with the CIO, Victor Hayes, became another weapon in her arsenal. "You are no longer permitted to speak directly with the CIO," she informed me, her eyes glinting with a perverse satisfaction. This was an almost comical absurdity. My role involved selling a multi-million-dollar tech product, a product that required intricate technical understanding and direct input from the very person responsible for its underlying architecture. Furthermore, Victor Hayes was, officially, one of my direct bosses. To forbid me from communicating with him was to deliberately sabotage my ability to perform my core duties, creating an untenable professional paradox. Then came the calculated cruelty of denying my long-planned and approved vacation. I had meticulously arranged it months in advance, coordinating with colleagues and ensuring all my responsibilities would be covered. Eleanor, however, chose to arbitrarily revoke it, offering no valid reason, simply stating, "It's no longer approved." It was a deliberate blow, designed to undermine my sense of security and control, to signal that I was now entirely at her mercy. Anything she could devise to screw me over, she executed with a chilling, gleeful efficiency. Coinciding with this escalating corporate warfare, a far more serious and personal battle began to unfold in my life. A significant health problem. The symptoms started subtly, a persistent ache, a creeping fatigue, slowly escalating into something far more debilitating, eventually requiring complex surgery. The stress of the work environment undoubtedly exacerbated my condition, creating a vicious cycle of physical and mental exhaustion. The timing was, to say the least, catastrophic. Despite my declining health, I continued to work diligently from home. This remote arrangement, initially a perk, became an absolute necessity. It allowed me to manage my symptoms, to rest when needed, and to conserve my limited energy. My work performance remained unaffected. The sales numbers continued to speak for themselves. Yet, Eleanor Vance, fully aware of my deteriorating health and the necessity of my home office setup, chose this moment to deliver another cruel blow. "You need to come into the office every day," she declared, her voice devoid of empathy. Effective immediately, the demand was irrational, vindictive. She knew the 3-hour round-trip commute was an enormous burden under normal circumstances. Under the weight of my illness, it was an impossibility. Now, I understand what you might be thinking. Why didn't I just leave? Why didn't I just cut my losses, find another job, escape this toxic environment? And believe me, the thought was a constant, gnawing presence in my mind. The desire to simply walk away, to reclaim my peace, was overwhelming. But I was trapped. I desperately needed the health insurance. My surgery, a complex procedure requiring the expertise of 3 specialized surgeons, was scheduled. There was simply no way for me to secure another job quickly enough to bridge the gap in coverage, to ensure that the vital, life-saving medical care I needed would be accessible. My physical well-being, my very life, depended on maintaining that employment, however agonizing it had become. My doctor, recognizing the severity of my situation, provided a detailed medical note, unequivocally releasing me from the obligation of the daily commute. The note clearly stated that working from home was a medical necessity, allowing me to continue my employment without compromising my recovery. Furthermore, my original employment contract explicitly stipulated that working from home was an agreed-upon condition of my hire. Legally, they were on thin ice. As long as my work performance remained high, they had no legal grounds to force me into that grueling commute, especially with a doctor's note explicitly contravening it. The night before my surgery, a night already fraught with anxiety and the quiet terror of impending medical intervention, the phone rang. It was Eleanor Vance. Her voice, as always, was devoid of warmth, chillingly detached. "We've canceled your health insurance," she stated, without preamble or explanation. The line clicked dead. The receiver slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering to the floor. The words echoed in the sudden silence of my home, a final, crushing blow. The accumulated stress, the relentless harassment, the profound injustice, coupled with the crushing weight of my physical illness, finally overwhelmed me. I collapsed onto the floor, the world spinning, then fading into a merciful darkness. I was so sick, so utterly exhausted, mentally and physically, that my body simply gave out. The next morning, I was stirring, disoriented, when Marcus Thorne called, his voice frantic, desperate to speak with me. My mother, who had been an unwavering pillar of strength throughout this ordeal, protecting me from the worst of the fallout, answered the phone. She adamantly refused to let him speak to me. As of that morning, I was on official medical leave, and we were preparing to head to the hospital for my surgery. It was only later that I learned what had transpired. Marcus, in his panicked state, had informed the company's attorney, Ms. Albright, about Eleanor's unilateral cancellation of my health insurance. Ms. Albright, a cold, calculating legal professional, but one who understood the razor-thin edge of corporate liability, had unleashed a furious dressing down on Marcus. "That is illegal," she had reportedly screamed, tearing him a new one. The company, faced with the immediate threat of devastating legal action, had instantly reinstated my insurance. In the 2 weeks that followed, while I was recovering from my complex surgery, my mother, ever vigilant, had taken matters into her own hands. She found me a new lawyer, a seasoned employment law specialist named Mr. Davies. It had become abundantly clear that the shenanigans, as she called them, were not merely unprofessional, but deeply illegal. I still needed them as an employer, however loathsome the thought, because I was in no physical or mental shape to rigorously job hunt while recuperating from major surgery. My initial consultation with Mr. Davies was a revelation. He listened patiently, meticulously taking notes as I recounted the entire, sordid saga. When I finished, he leaned back, a grim look on his face. "You have an excellent claim for retaliation," he stated, his voice firm and unequivocal. "Every single action they have taken against you since you mentioned your lawyer friend is textbook illegal retaliation. Companies are not allowed to penalize employees for reporting nefarious acts, or even for simply mentioning the possibility of legal counsel. This is an open and shut case, and I will take it on." His confidence was a much-needed balm for my bruised spirit. He advised me that, to remain within protocol and strengthen our case for the EEOC claim he would file, I needed to continue working there. I would be an active employee while he built our legal fortress. The day came for me to return to work, armed with Mr. Davies' counsel and a newfound, steely resolve. The company, I learned, had relocated during my absence, a planned move that had somehow escaped my knowledge. Eleanor Vance, predictably, refused to provide me with the new office address, attempting to manufacture another reason to penalize me for non-attendance. But Mr. Davies was one step ahead. "They have to tell you," he informed them, a clear warning echoing through their legal channels. So, Eleanor, begrudgingly, provided directions. But even then, she couldn't resist one last petty act of sabotage. She deliberately gave me incorrect directions, forcing me to arrive late on my first day back. I navigated the convoluted turns, my frustration simmering, but I arrived. I walked into the new office, a vast, open-plan space filled with the anonymous hum of corporate life. It looked like any other modern workspace: clean lines, glass partitions, the scent of new carpet, and freshly brewed coffee. Except for one distinct, glaring anomaly. Directly in front of Marcus Thorne's expansive glass-walled office, positioned in the middle of a wide, exposed area, was a single, solitary desk. It stood there, isolated, vulnerable, a stark symbol of my new professional reality. "Welcome to your new desk," I thought, a bitter smile touching my lips. And my new role? I wasn't allowed to do sales anymore. In fact, I wasn't allowed to do anything at all. Period. They had effectively decommissioned me, transforming me into a glorified, highly paid ornament. A pariah. The company had hired a fresh influx of new employees during my leave, and Eleanor Vance had evidently poisoned the well. They treated me with a cautious distance, an awkward avoidance that spoke volumes. I later learned she had circulated a pack of venomous lies, warning them to stay away from me if they knew what was good for them. I was a corporate leper, a ghost in the machine. But I was no longer the same person who had collapsed on the floor in despair. The physical illness, the emotional torment, the legal consultation, they had forged something new within me, an unyielding resolve, a quiet, strategic fury. Since I had literally nothing to do, yet couldn't simply sit there looking like a dope, I channeled my energy into my new, covert mission. Per Mr. Davies's strict instructions, I began to meticulously document everything. Every slight, every instance of sabotage, every petty humiliation. My personal notebook became my sanctuary, my weapon. I was meticulous in my note-taking, logging dates, times, specific statements, observed behaviors, and any potential witnesses. My goal was simple: to create an unassailable record, a concrete testament to their illegal retaliation. Eleanor, sensing my quiet industry, my refusal to break, began to escalate her tactics. She started writing me up for the most ludicrous, inconsequential infractions, not answering my phone on the first ring, asking too many questions during company-wide meetings. She even wrote me up for requesting to see my own personnel file, a legal right for any employee, though the company retained the right to refuse photocopies. Each time she presented a write-up, I was required to sign it, acknowledging receipt. There was a space provided for an employee's response. Consistently, without fail, I would scrawl 3 simple words: "I do not agree with this assessment." This calm, unwavering refusal to acknowledge her fabricated transgressions infuriated her beyond measure. The blank, unyielding statement chipped away at her carefully constructed authority. In an almost comical display of escalating pettiness, she actually wrote me up again, this time for writing the statement that I didn't agree with her previous write-ups. The absurdity of it all was almost too much to bear, but I maintained my serene facade. There were several instances where she would summon me into her office, a glass-walled cage designed for intimidation. Once inside, she would close the door and proceed to literally scream at me, loudly and enthusiastically, her face contorted in a mask of rage. She would lean inches from my face, her spittle flying, her neck veins bulging, her voice reaching a shrill crescendo, attempting to provoke a reaction, to break my composure. But I wouldn't engage. My standard answer to everything, regardless of the venom she spewed, was a calm, placid, "Okay." It was a single word, delivered without inflection, utterly devoid of emotion, and it drove her absolutely apoplectic. I would sit there, my gaze steady, a dreamy, almost detached expression on my face, internally envisioning her blowing a vein in her head, stroking out from the sheer frustration of my equanimity. My calm, unwavering refusal to be provoked infuriated her more than any outburst of my own could have. Still and all, I was in it to win it at this point. The personal indignity, the professional humiliation, the sheer maliciousness of their actions, none of it mattered anymore. My focus was absolute, my determination unshakable. It didn't matter what new humiliation they dished out. I took it all with a bland, impassive face, then returned to my isolated desk and meticulously documented every single detail in my notebook. My notebook became my silent confidant, my growing ledger of injustice. Eleanor loathed that notebook. She was sure, absolutely certain, that I was doing exactly what I was doing, documenting. The very sight of it, clutched in my hand, inflamed her. But because it was my personal property, she couldn't legally confiscate it. This led to an elaborate, almost farcical game of hide-and-seek. I had to carry all my belongings with me everywhere I went, to company-wide meetings, to the bathroom, to lunch, because I caught her once, red-handed, rummaging through my desk drawer. Not just the drawer, but my actual purse, which I kept inside it. The sheer audacity, the blatant disregard for privacy, fueled my silent fury. Though, I confess, it gave me a fleeting moment of great joy to write a note reading "fuck you," which I carefully tucked into my backpack, then jerry-rigged a subtle tripwire so I would know if she went into it. She did. I withstood it all with a brave face, a mask of serene indifference. The torrent of abuse, the calculated isolation, the constant undermining, I absorbed it, transformed it into fuel for my meticulously building case. It was only once I left for the day, stepping out of the office and into the relative anonymity of the outside world, that the facade would crumble. The dam would break, and the raw emotional toll would finally manifest. My attorney, Mr. Davies, received many sobbing phone calls during this period. He listened patiently, empathetically, offering reassurance and reminding me of the strength of our case. Finally, the day arrived. Mr. Davies called, his voice firm and decisive. "We have everything we need," he announced. "You can resign. Better yet, you don't even have to give 2 weeks' notice." A wave of profound relief, a surge of vindication, washed over me. The long, arduous ordeal was finally nearing its end. I returned from lunch, a quiet anticipation buzzing beneath my calm exterior. I walked over to my isolated desk, switched on the computer, and typed a single, declarative sentence. I resign immediately. I printed the letter, the paper feeling crisp and final in my hands. I walked it into the HR guy's office, a man who, I knew, had been complicit in their evil machinations, a silent participant in the abuse. I handed it to him, watching his eyes scan the single line of text. His mouth slowly formed a perfect O shape, and he half stood from his chair, a look of stunned disbelief spreading across his face. He looked up at me, bewildered. I offered him a smile, as sweet and innocent as pie. "Bye-bye," I said, my voice soft, almost melodic. Then I turned, walked out the door, and drove home, feeling, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, truly, profoundly fine. The shackles were off. 1 month later, the full weight of the legal system began to bear down. My lawyer, Mr. Davies, and I sat in a sterile, impersonal office at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. Across the table sat Marcus Thorne, the CEO, his face etched with a combination of defiance and apprehension. Next to him, Eleanor Vance, her usual smug, self-satisfied smile in place, radiating an arrogant confidence that bordered on delusion. Beside her, Ms. Albright, the company's attorney, a formidable figure, her expression unreadable. The air was thick with tension, a battle of wills about to commence. Our EEOC investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Jenkins, presided over the meeting, her gaze impartial but keenly observant. In my state, you couldn't simply file a lawsuit against a company for issues like harassment and retaliation. The claims first had to be rigorously evaluated by the EEOC. If they determined there were sufficient grounds, they would then issue a right to sue document, essentially giving you the green light to proceed with full legal action. This meeting was that crucial initial evaluation. Mr. Davies began his presentation. He laid out my case with calm, compelling logic, detailing every instance of retaliation, every deliberate act of malice, every piece of evidence we had meticulously gathered. He spoke for 40 long minutes, recounting the entire, agonizing saga, the sales numbers, the investor meeting, the CIO's comment, Marcus's sudden anger, the company lawyer's call, the targeted harassment, the denied meetings, the enforced isolation, the stolen vacation, the cruel cancellation of health insurance, the forced commute, the new desk, the fabricated write-ups, the screaming fits. He presented my meticulously kept notebook, a thick tome of documented injustices. His presentation was thorough, damning, and utterly unassailable. Then, it was their turn. Ms. Albright, with Eleanor Vance beaming beside her, presented their defense. It was a predictable barrage of allegations regarding my poor employment performance, attempting to paint me as a troublesome, underperforming employee. Their evidence, predictably, consisted of Eleanor's voluminous stack of copious write-ups, each carefully dated, each detailing some manufactured transgression. Eleanor, her smug smile widening, puffed out her chest, clearly believing her fabricated paper trail was impenetrable. Ms. Jenkins, the EEOC investigator, listened patiently, then turned her gaze to Eleanor. "Regarding these write-ups," she inquired, her voice even, "what is the timeline? Were they issued before or after the claimant's initial report of an issue, and before or after she engaged legal counsel?" Eleanor Vance, her smugness now reaching its zenith, replied with an almost theatrical flourish. "Oh, they were all," she stated, her voice dripping with self-satisfaction, categorically prior to her claim, as is clearly noted by the dates on each and every document. She gestured triumphantly at her stack of papers, confident in her deception. Ms. Jenkins looked at Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies looked at me, a silent, almost imperceptible nod of confirmation passing between us. I met Eleanor Vance's gaze across the table, my expression serene, a quiet storm brewing behind my eyes. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, I reached into my briefcase. From its depths, I pulled out my own, carefully guarded stack of photocopies. As I handed them to Ms. Jenkins, Eleanor, her confidence suddenly cracking, barked, "She's not supposed to have those. They're company property." But it was too late. Ms. Jenkins was already taking the documents. And as she began to review them, the truth, stark and undeniable, was laid bare. I pointed to specific instances. "If you compare these, Ms. Jenkins," I said, my voice calm, "you will see that the dates on Ms. Vance's copies have clearly been altered. My copies, taken immediately after she presented them, show the original, true dates." The room plunged into an immediate, heavy silence. You could have heard a pin drop. The weight of the exposed deception pressed down on everyone present. The sheer audacity of Eleanor's scheme, the crude simplicity of her forgery, was breathtaking. You see, whenever Eleanor wrote me up, I was instructed to personally take the document to Marcus Thorne for his signature and to have it placed in my personnel file. But along the way, out of Eleanor's sight, I would make a quick detour to the copier. A quiet click, a silent whir, and I would have my own pristine, unaltered copy. Eleanor never knew I was doing this. She had made copies with the original dates blanked out, then, believing herself clever, had backdated them to appear as if they predated my protected activity. She was not only a bully, she was astonishingly incompetent in her malice. Ms. Jenkins reviewed my copies, her expression slowly shifting from professional neutrality to one of grim disapproval. She set the documents down on the table, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of Marcus Thorne, Eleanor Vance, and their lawyer. She didn't say a word for a long, agonizing moment. The silence was deafening, pregnant with unspoken condemnation. Then she spoke. Her words, delivered with a quiet but devastating authority, are etched into my memory to this day. "I have been doing this job for over 20 years, Ms. Jenkins began, her voice low but piercing. "And in that time, I have seen a great deal of ill treatment and illegal undertakings by both employees and employers. I have seen forged documents, altered records, blatant attempts to obscure the truth. But I have never," she paused, her gaze resting pointedly on Eleanor Vance. "I have never seen someone so incredibly stupid as to present documents so easily disproved. Not only are employees legally entitled to receive and keep a copy of formal write-ups, regardless of what Ms. Vance believes, but reading these ridiculous allegations, it is obvious you are merely trying to manufacture a case against this claimant where none existed, and to cover your own illegal actions." Her words were a thunderclap. She went on, her voice rising slightly. "Ms. Vance, Mr. Thorne, your company has a clear, unequivocal case for a lawsuit against it. And moreover, based on the evidence presented today, I have no doubt that Ms. My Name would win that lawsuit decisively. I strongly recommend that your side retire to a nearby office and determine a settlement amount to pay her immediately or risk the full weight of litigation." The color drained from Marcus Thorne's face. Eleanor Vance's smug smile evaporated, replaced by a mask of horrified realization. Ms. Albright, the company's lawyer, looked like she wanted to evaporate into thin air. They rose, defeated, and retreated to a nearby office. Even through the closed door, I could hear Ms. Albright, her voice a furious, low snarl, dressing them down. Words and phrases drifted through the thin walls, fragments of a corporate meltdown. "You lied to me," she hissed. "You lied to the EOC. Presenting false documents? You have broken so many laws. Figure out a number, a big enough number, to pay her so this doesn't go to court, because you will lose, and you will lose everything." A few minutes later, chastened and utterly humiliated, they re-emerged. Ms. Albright, her face grim, delivered their offer, $50,000. Mr. Davies glanced at me. It was a good offer, a clean settlement, avoiding the protracted and emotionally draining process of a full lawsuit. I nodded. "We accept," Mr. Davies stated, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. My lawyer and I left the EOC office, a sense of profound vindication washing over us. The moment we stepped into the parking lot, the tension released. We did an impromptu, triumphant football touchdown dance, a primal expression of victory and relief. As we celebrated, I happened to glance back up at the EOC building. Through the large window, I could clearly see Eleanor Vance. She was standing there, looking utterly miserable, her face streaked with tears. She had just been fired. That, I considered, was my year one revenge. Now, I want to make something clear. I am generally not a hateful person. I get angry, I process it, and I move on. But for Eleanor Vance, for the depths of her malice, the calculated cruelty of her actions, I nurtured a different kind of emotion. I nurtured hatred, a slow-burning ember that I tended with meticulous care. I vowed, silently, to one day exact a further measure of revenge, a more personal, insidious retribution. And so, I kept tabs on her. In the quiet corners of the internet, I tracked her movements. I discovered that, after her ignominious firing, she had, with characteristic arrogance, decided to open her own finance marketing company. Then I waited. I allowed a full year to pass, a period of gestation for my carefully planned, petty delight. For the past 18 years, I have embarked on a project of profound, soul-refreshing satisfaction. Each year, without fail, I visit her company's website. I meticulously collect every single work email address and every listed phone number for her employees. Then, I put them to good use. I subscribe them all to get more information from every aggressive, irritating online entity I can find. Dubious online schools peddling questionable degrees, relentless online insurance companies, financial services promising instant wealth, all those myriad aggressive organizations that capture your contact information and cling to it longer than a gypsy's curse, inundating you with relentless, unwanted sales pitches. In the last few years, as technology evolved, so too did my methods. I discovered an online email bomb service. This ingenious service takes a single email address and instantly subscribes it to thousands upon thousands of newsletters, requests for more information feeds, and other online buyers of email addresses for marketing purposes. I tested it, of course, on a burner email address. The effect was immediate and devastating. Within seconds, my test inbox was overwhelmed, thousands of emails flooding in, a digital tsunami of unwanted correspondence. And they never, truly, never fucking stop. You literally have to shut down the email address, abandon it entirely, because it becomes utterly unsalvageable. The efficacy of my yearly ritual became evident in the most satisfying way. Each year, when I returned to her website to collect the updated contact information, I would observe a pattern. All the employee email addresses had invariably been changed to new ones. A fresh set, a new digital identity, only to be subjected to the same relentless annual assault. Last year, a delightful twist added another layer to my satisfaction. My cousin secured a job in the same building where Eleanor Vance's company was located. I immediately enlisted her help. My cousin, with her natural charm and gregarious personality, made it a point to befriend a receptionist working for Eleanor Vance. After executing my yearly digital onslaught, my cousin arranged to have lunch with the receptionist. My cousin reported back, her voice barely containing her amusement. The receptionist was in a foul mood, visibly stressed and exasperated. She confided that the entire organization was in a state of utter disarray because the IT department had, yet again, been forced to redo all the company's email addresses. "It keeps happening over and over," the receptionist lamented, "and nobody, absolutely nobody, can figure out why." She further shared that Eleanor Vance, the owner, had been forced to replace her personal cell phone number 3 times due to the sheer volume of unsolicited texts and phone calls she received whenever it happened again. Eleanor, in her early days of operating the company, would sometimes list her personal cell phone number on the website, a lapse I dutifully exploited, subscribing it to everything under the sun, ensuring a direct line for chaos. But the best part, the most exquisite detail that truly keeps me warm and cozy at night, the thought that lulls me into the deepest, most restorative sleep, was hearing how Eleanor Vance had lost a mega client. A substantial, high-value client had, according to the receptionist, pulled their business, citing concerns that the company appeared to be in too much turmoil too often. The ripple effect of her own arrogant cruelty, amplified and returned to her year after year, slowly eroding her business, her reputation, her peace of mind. It was, and remains, a masterpiece of quiet, sustained retribution. And there was one more piece, a detail that had momentarily slipped my mind until a sharp-eyed Redditor brought it up in the original recounting of this tale. They had posited that if the investor had pulled out, it would have been a neat twist. That thought, a casual comment from an anonymous stranger, jogged my memory, bringing into sharp focus another layer of consequence. The investor, Mr. Sterling, the very man who had witnessed Eleanor's audacious lie and my subsequent save, did indeed pull out. Once I left the company, that vital engine of sales that I had been ceased to function. The company, without my unique ability to bridge the tech sales gap and my relentless drive, simply could not duplicate the same scale of sales revenue I had been generating. The pipeline dried up, the momentum stalled, and the consistent, impressive numbers I had delivered vanished. Mr. Sterling, a shrewd and cautious man, saw the sudden, precipitous decline in actual sales performance, despite Eleanor's initial inflated claims. He became skittish. The instability, the lack of consistent growth post my departure, clearly signaled a higher risk than he was willing to undertake. His $6 million investment evaporated. The company, through sheer grit and the inherent quality of its product, did eventually go on to achieve a measure of success, but it took them significantly longer, a much more arduous and prolonged struggle, due directly to the fiasco that Eleanor Vance had orchestrated and the vacuum my forced departure created. It was another consequence, another domino falling, a testament to the far-reaching impact of arrogance and deceit. The true measure of a person, I've come to understand, is not merely how they react to triumph, but how they endure tribulation, and, perhaps most importantly, how they choose to rectify an injustice. There is a silent, unyielding force that resides in those who are often overlooked, in those who do not loudly proclaim their struggles or broadcast their intentions. It is a quiet resilience, a strategic patience, that can become the most potent weapon. The world often dismisses those who do not engage in the noisy theatrics of confrontation, but it is precisely in their deliberate, methodical gathering of strength, their unwavering focus on the long game, that true power can be found. The slow burn of justice, once kindled, once meticulously fed with evidence and calculated action, can consume utterly, leaving behind only the cold, unyielding ash of consequence for those who mistake quiet resolve for weakness. And in that quiet, enduring ash, there is, for me, a lasting peace.